Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an incredibly debated historical and religious topic. We're going to unpack exactly what the source text actually says, myth versus method, unpacking the Quran's approach to slavery. Let's completely strip away the modern assumptions for a minute and look directly at the actual framework. So, let's just tackle the absolute biggest misconception right out of the gate. Does the Quran explicitly ban slavery? The honest answer is no, it doesn't. But, and this is a massive but, what it does instead is absolutely fascinating. Rather than just a simple, immediate prohibition, the text employs a deeply strategic method designed to eventually dismantle the entire institution. To see how that worked, let's look at part 1, the pragmatic context. Okay, so you have to put yourself in the mindset of the ancient Arab world. Slavery wasn't just a practice, it was a deeply entrenched global economic engine. An instantaneous, overnight abolition that would have plunged incredibly vulnerable people into mass poverty and unemployment. There was literally zero infrastructure to support them. So, to avoid that kind of catastrophic social disruption, the text employed a psychological approach. It focused on winning hearts and creating a gradual ethical restructuring of society. Instead of just mirroring those brutal ancient systems, the Qur'an introduced these 6 completely radical shifts. It affirmed the humanity of slaves and captives. It integrated emancipation into religious virtue, restricted abuse, heavily encouraged freedom, elevated spiritual equality, and morally centered the most vulnerable people. It's essentially a total restructuring of how human beings view one another. Which brings us to part 2, elevating human dignity. The very first step in this psychological approach was establishing an unbreakable baseline of human worth. If we look at the source text, specifically chapter 17, verse 70, it says, "We have certainly honored the children of Adam." By citing this, the text instantly dismantles the idea that any human being is inherently lesser. That honor is bestowed upon literally all of humanity, unconditionally. And then you have chapter 49, verse 13, which brilliantly levels the playing field. It makes it crystal clear that spiritual equality and righteousness completely outrank any man-made social hierarchy or tribal affiliation. But here's the thing, it doesn't just stop at high-level spiritual philosophy. It gets incredibly practical, on the ground. Chapter 24, verse 33, explicitly improves legal status by mandating emancipation contracts. It says if they seek a contract for emancipation, then make such a contract. And crucially, it instructs owners to give them from the wealth of Allah. Actually, think about that for a second. It literally tells owners to help fund their slaves' freedom. Let's move on to part 3, clear paths to freedom. So how exactly did the Quran create a real, tangible path to freedom by making it a core religious duty? In chapter 90, verses 10 through 14, believers are asked about the difficult path. And the text answers its own question unequivocally. It's the freeing of slaves. It elevates liberation to pretty much the highest moral choice you could make. And chapter 2, verse 177 takes this even further. It completely redefines piety. It states that righteous people are those who give the money cheerfully to free the slaves. So true righteousness isn't just about praying. It requires actual, cheerful financial sacrifice to liberate other people. Now, this part is absolutely wild. Beyond just individual virtue, the legal code itself was fundamentally engineered for abolition. The Quran systematically funneled everyday penalties directly into buying people's freedom. If you committed a daily misdemeanor, like breaking an oath, the penalty listed in verses like 589 or 558.3 was the freeing of a slave. On top of that, chapter 9, verse 60 legally tied the distribution of community charities directly toward funding emancipation. The system was literally taxing itself to buy people's freedom. Next up is part 4. The rules of war. We have to talk about warfare, because back in the ancient world, war was the primary engine fueling slavery. So it's absolutely crucial we define our terms accurately here. When the Quran speaks of gaining captives, it strictly limits that intake to active wartime scenarios. We're talking strictly about prisoners of war here, not generational, perpetual slaves. And this is where we get the decisive rule on the whole matter. Chapter 47, verse 4, dictates exactly what happens to these prisoners of war. Then after either grace or ransom, until the war lays down its burdens. Notice what's missing there. Keeping them permanently is simply not an option on the table. They must either be gracefully released as a favor or ransomed back. Finally, let's look at part 5, the ultimate goal. When you take all of these verses and put them together, it's like a giant puzzle coming into focus. A highly practical 4-step methodology emerges. Step 1, elevate spiritual dignity to fundamentally change mindsets. Step 2, incentivize and literally fund emancipation through daily laws and charities. Step 3, cut off the supply chain by restricting captives to wartime scenarios with mandatory release or ransom. And step 4, the natural mathematical result is a gradual reduction in numbers, inevitably leading to total abolition. It naturally dismantled the institution from the inside out without collapsing the society that relied on it. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to consider. When we look at history and honestly, even the complex systemic issues of our modern world, how does this method of gradual, deeply embedded ethical restructuring compare to immediate disruptive mandates? It's a truly fascinating lens through which to view how real, lasting change is actually achieved. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.